Hi, everybody. Today we have with us Dr. Lori Nadel, who is a psychotherapist who helps individuals, first responders, and organization to recover from catastrophic events. And let's face it, this pandemic is pretty much has been an emergency for everybody, and very unexpected pandemic that we're all dealing with. She's also a journalist, was for 20 years of her career, so she has quite the diverse background. And Dr. Nadel has helped some of the first responders from 9/11, and she also worked with the students and teacher at Parkland when the school shooting occurred. So she's got quite the background to help us all of our employers, our management, our healthcare organizations, to think through how to get through this crisis. So Dr. Nadel, I'm going to turn it over to you, and if you could elaborate a little bit more on your background and then go into your presentation, we're all anxious to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Patty, so much for welcoming me, and for each of you for listening and spending some time together with me during this really difficult time. I was a journalist for the first 20 years of my career, mostly worked in what we call hard news, or these days it's called breaking news. I did a year as a field reporter in South America in a war zone. And after about 18, 19 years of processing and producing, at that time it was film and taped stories about disasters all over the world, I came to recognize that people whose lives were damaged or impaired by catastrophic events would need special type of long-term support. And so I left the news business in 1987. I burned out actually covering the Iran-Contra hearings, and as I was recovering from a long Epstein-Barr period, I discovered meditation and actually how to incorporate new information about wellness and alternative healing to build strength and to rebuild my immune system, and ended up going back to school to earn 2 doctorates, one in psychology and one in clinical hypnotherapy. And for the past 30 years, I've specialized in helping people whose lives have been impacted by traumatic events to discover hope, healing, and strength, even in the darkest moments. This presentation, which is called The 5 Gifts, Discovering Hope, Healing, and Strength When Disaster Strikes, is based on my book, which is called The 5 Gifts, Discovering Hope, Healing, and Strength When Disaster Strikes. Next slide, please. We're now actually in a period of time where we're dealing with a lot of unknowns. And because a lot of offices have actually shut down, theaters have shut down, workshop spaces, we're now working remotely. And yet at the same time, we're also seeing a lot of messaging on television ads about the importance of creating a culture of empathy and care and compassion, because now more than ever, it's important that we become interdependent and that we focus on keeping people motivated by focusing on our employees' and managers' needs. Next slide, please. In this webinar, you're going to learn how to develop a healing culture in the workplace with emotional first aid tools and the 5 gifts. Now, emotional first aid tools are tools that help us to take the pressure and lower stress levels very, very quickly, kind of take the edge off. And the 5 gifts are what we need to create a long-term culture of empathy, because going forward, this is a weird kind of situation, unlike other disasters where the event has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then we deal with the aftershocks. This is a kind of, this is an all-encompassing physical, biological, cultural, socioeconomic incident that doesn't have a clear time frame. And so we need these 5 gifts to help us get through this long period of ambiguity, and we'll be touching on those in a moment. We're also going to be talking about how to build a culture of empathy and resilience during uncertain times. The old rules and the old expectations aren't working anymore. And in order to really create a new brand and to kind of move our businesses forward, we need to really build that culture of empathy so that people know that we're all in it together and that our businesses thrive and survive based on our ability to collaborate. The third objective is to establish a sense of safety for employees to be able to seek mental health assistance without the fear of being stigmatized. And I'm going to be talking briefly about the peer support model that is used with first responders that's called critical incident stress management debriefing, and how you can begin to create peer support, modules or groups for your employees within specific departments or teams. And finally, we'll talk about how to generate brand recognition within your culture of empathy and wellness. Next slide, please. There are certain benefits of building a culture of empathy. Empathy is a new term right now in the business world. It's kind of been replacing teamwork, and it's been replacing innovation. But in fact, in order to really have innovation and to be able to see around the corner, to be able to anticipate trends and possibilities and the need for new products and services, we need our employees and our managers and our teams to feel safe and to know that their emotional and psychological needs are going to be acknowledged and recognized. So it's important for HR and also for you within your individual teams and departments to find a way to encourage regular ongoing peer support programs and discussions. To enhance your brand through messaging that imprints your culture of empathy. And we've seen a lot of this on TV in the last 2 months, everything from hospitals to Nike to hotel brands, food, everything is showing people working together and people expressing concern for each other. So empathy as a brand message is really hot right now, but I believe that it's a very solid foundation for long-term messaging about what your brand brings to your industry and to the wellness industry in general. We want to begin also by talking about how a culture of empathy will build long-term employee loyalty for retention. People are less likely to leave and to look for other employment or other companies if they know that their needs are being recognized and it's safe for them to express distress, and that they understand that when they're working together under exceptional stress, or what we call acute stress, which is what people are going through right now, that their loyalty and their dedication to working in these new circumstances is going to be acknowledged and valued. The culture of empathy also strengthens leadership skills. And of course, if we look at, for example, first responders or the military, what are one of the most important traits of a strong leader in survival situations is being able to build a core sense of interconnectedness and teamwork. So empathy is really a very important part of leadership skills. We want to be able to see that if we motivate employees to see that their work in the industry is a contribution to wellness during these periods of extreme acute stress, whether this is due to COVID-19 or a natural disaster, which certainly it's hurricane season starting in a couple of weeks, whether it's an intentional disaster like Parkland or 9/11, if employees can view their work as a contribution to wellness and healing, that will also build a stronger brand, and people, consumers and customers and clients will be more likely to come back and work with us because we're focused on their needs. We're also going to talk about building strong teams of empathy warriors who are motivated by the need to contribute during turbulent times. And that means listening to people's ideas. Very often somebody is hired at a certain level and they're not really being paid to come up with new ideas or vision for how a particular service or a particular product can be marketed in the future, in order to build a team or a culture where people feel free to contribute these ideas. I like the idea of empathy warriors, that everybody is coming to work with the idea of contributing to healing at a difficult time, like we're giving through, well, like we are living through now. Thank you. Next slide, please. I don't like the phrase "the new normal." I think it's actually dangerous. Firstly, it habituates us to pain and suffering. We say pain and suffering is normal, we just have to get used to it. It takes away hope, because then people think, well, this is how it's going to be forever, and it makes people feel powerless. As we see after every disaster, we see a big upsurge and uptick in people wanting to help, people being on a mission, and first responders call it the mission cycle. The mission cycle lasts about 2 months, but after the cameras leave, the real work begins. And so we need sustainable empathy, and that takes time. It's very important that we, employees, managers, and our employees don't begin to numb out and think that this is the new normal, because we'll experience, we'll see a loss of productivity, we'll see people kind of dropping out, tuning out, and numbing out. So we need to think of new ways of being, doing, and relating. And one of the key questions you can ask is, what matters the most to you and to your team? And if you see somebody is starting to kind of tune out and get disinterested and say, well, this is the new normal, the power question that you can ask is, what do you need? What do you need to be more engaged? I think as managers and as leaders, that is one of the key phrases that can help everybody stay connected to the idea of a brand and a culture of empathy. Next slide, please. When we put people first, whether it's people within our own organization, our own team, or our customers, or our clients, I like to talk about the 3 C's, which are communication, community, and connection. Next slide. Empathy and the 3 C's equals, we call hashtag stronger together. Here are some hashtags that I think we can use to keep our employees and our managers and even our clients motivated. Wellness umbrella. All the services and products that we offer can fall under a general umbrella of wellness services, which are more important now more than ever. Relieving stress is more important. Feeling attractive and looking healthy is more important than ever. Hashtag empathy, empathy in action, stronger together, and my favorite, stronger in the broken places. Everybody's feeling a little bit bruised around the heart right now, and stressed out and fatigue. You hear the phrase COVID fatigue. I like to use this quote to help people come back stronger. And the quote is that life breaks us all, but some of us are stronger in the broken places. And that's from Ernest Hemingway, A Farewell to Arms. It's very important to understand, and very important to give ourselves permission to feel tired, to feel drained, to feel a little bit of compassion fatigue, to notice when we begin to feel burned out, and to understand that these are very demanding times that we're going through, and that by acknowledging the effect that these stressors are having on us, if we acknowledge it, we can get stronger. If we learn how to pause during the day and take 5 minutes at a time, we'll talk about this later, for what I call vitamins for the soul, or just to recharge, you'll find that if you encourage these kind of wellness pauses, that your teams and your managers and your employees really can get on board with this idea of hashtag stronger together. Next slide, please. When we're talking about re-entry into the workplace, or redeveloping or reopening our workplaces, or even many companies revamping their workplaces, and so there's more of remote teams in wellness rather than people working in specific offices or buildings, we really need the 5 gifts to help us with this long-term rebuilding process. the 5 gifts came to me when I was meditating after I lost my house to Hurricane Sandy in 2012. Hurricane Sandy hit the Northeast coast on October 28th, towards the end of hurricane season. It destroyed about a million people lost their homes. I was one of them. It stretched 1,000 miles along the coast from southern New Jersey up to Bridgeport, Connecticut. And in the process of figuring out how I was going to survive and rebuild the house, I took some time for myself to recharge. And while I was meditating, I heard an inner voice whisper these 5 words, and I was told to write them down. And I was told that these were the 5 gifts that would help me to help others to recover from a major event like a hurricane or right now COVID-19. So the first gift is humility. And humility is the gift that helps us to accept that there are forces greater than we are and that there are events that we cannot control. Humility, it gives us the grace to accept the unacceptable and to know that it's going to take time to come to terms with it. And this is when we need the gift of patience, because 5 months from now, 8 months from now, if there's a second wave, if there's an anniversary, if there's an anniversary of when we got sick or when someone we loved got sick, or we don't know how long this is going to last. Daily tasks are new. They take longer to accomplish. It's harder to focus. It's harder for people to spend more time online than to spend time interacting with other people. And because grief and healing are not deliverables, they have no timetable. The heart heals in its own time, in its own way. And if somebody suddenly gets triggered and they have what we call a sudden grief reaction, months after this has officially been declared, that COVID is gone and we have a vaccine and everything is fine, we need patience with ourselves because our emotions will be up and down for quite a long time as we have triggers that remind us of the difficulties. The third gift is empathy. And empathy is the gift that connects us with others. It's the feel-good gift. It's the one that we want to continue because we get an uplifting feeling from it. Humility and patience are the foundation because empathy, as I said, the empathy phase normally just lasts at the beginning of a disaster. But we need sustainable empathy, which is why I develop long-term support programs. After 9/11, I worked with teenagers whose fathers were killed in the World Trade Center. We ran the program for 5 years. I stepped in 2 years after the terrorist attack and was just starting to build a group that came together 2 years later. Very often people numb out and they go into shock and they may not be able to process their reactions until later, which is where the gift of patience comes in. Instead of judging people or telling them, you should be over it right now, sustainable empathy lets us stay in the moment with our employees and say, you seem upset. What do you need? Is there something we can do to help? The fourth gift is forgiveness. And because this is all new, we need to be gentler on ourselves and others when they make mistakes. Forgiveness is a gradual process. It's not a light switch. It's not I forgive or I don't forgive. It's really a question of being more accepting of our own flaws and accepting and understanding that other people have flaws and make mistakes as well. It's also important to understand that if you feel irritable, if you're having outbursts of annoyance, if you're stressed out because you can't sleep, or you're having problems helping your kids with their homeschooling, that it's important that we forgive ourselves for being human, because we really can't do anything to control the event itself or the outcomes. So there's a tolerance factor with forgiveness that helps to build that foundation of safety that we need for the long haul in building a culture of empathy. The fifth gift is growth. And growth is when we look back at this period, the 6 months, the year, maybe even the first 2 years after we went into lockdown. And we can look back and we can say, I wish that it never happened. I hope it never happens again. I would never wish it on anybody. However, if I hadn't if I hadn't gone through this, or if we hadn't gone through this together, we wouldn't be stronger in the broken places. We wouldn't have the strength and the culture of empathy and the positioning that we have in the wellness industry, because we were able to see the disaster as an opportunity and flow with it and grow with it. Next slide, please. Here are some of the messaging that we're seeing about empathy in the news. Usefulness and speed with a heavy dose of empathy will build brand preference during COVID-19. These are signs that are going up in Florida. Don't give up. You're not alone. You matter. Very important to reinforce that even though people may be self-quarantined, that we're not isolated from each other. Next slide, please. Here's some more. Empathy matters. Leaders' empathy matters in the midst of a pandemic. Empathy distribution, how New Zealand was able to get through this disaster. And again, in countries like New Zealand and Sweden and the Netherlands and Denmark, these are much smaller countries. They're practically, I think New Zealand now has 4 million people. So it's really like a section of Los Angeles. In these smaller countries, it's easier to focus on empathy consistently for the whole population. But we can focus consistently on empathy with our teams, with our employees, within our country, within our companies, and with businesses and within our industry, because empathy is what will help us grow. Next slide, please. Empathy is trending on Google, and we are going to need it because disasters of all kinds are increasing with frequency and intensity. Next slide, please. And actually, that is why I wrote my book. I wrote the 5 Gifts, started it before Hurricane Sandy, because I could see that disasters were trending in an uptick. If we look at everything from climate change, whether or not you call it climate change or an act of God, there's an increase in frequency and intensity of everything from volcanoes to wildfires to hurricanes to blizzards. We now have an environmental / biological / and socioeconomic disaster. I think of COVID as a triple strand disaster. First, we have the threat of the virus, which is a biological, it affects us biologically. It also is an environmental disaster because it affects how we take care of our environments, the sterilization, the disinfectant, the social distancing. The second strand is the mental health disaster. And if we look at all of the reports that are coming out now, anxiety and depression are increasing, and post-traumatic stress, which is kind of the long-term impact of living in a state of war or state of combat or the aftermath of any kind of disaster. You're constantly being flooded with stress hormones, and that creates certain changes in our mental health that we need to recognize. So that's mental health is the second strand. And the third strand, which is the elephant in the room that nobody talks about, is the socioeconomic disaster and financial trauma that affects all of us as individuals, as families, as business owners, as companies. So unlike other disasters that are specific events, COVID-19 is amorphous, it's invisible, and it has no clear timeline. It affects us physically, mentally, spiritually, and financially. Now, because this is a collective trauma that affects everybody, it's important to know that healing and relapses will continue to come at us in waves. After a major disaster, it can take 3 to 5 years to recover psychologically. And that's why my book, The 5 Gifts, talks about what we need to recover psychologically after a mega disaster, whether it's COVID, whether it's Hurricane Katrina, whether it's September 11th, or the genocide in Rwanda, or the tsunami in Thailand in 2005. I have interviewed people who have worked as first responders as ambulance drivers, as psychologists, or even people who lost somebody in those particular disasters, to find out what was the mindset, what were the spiritual tools, what were the values that helped everybody to get through these disasters and get to that stage of post-traumatic growth. And the one thing that came up time and time again were that the 5 gifts were useful and could be found in different cultures all over the world: humility, patience, empathy, forgiveness, and growth. And remember, forgiving ourselves is the most important step. Next slide, please. Here are some of the key mental health messages, and if you notice in the media, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, but June, as we're heading into June, June is Post-Traumatic Stress Awareness Month. And so it's important to understand that traumatic events are what we call stress amplifiers. They cause us to feel jittery. They can be disorienting. They can affect how we sleep. They can affect our ability to make healthy choices with regard to food, with regard to wine or beverages of choice. They can cause us to become compulsive about exercising or avoiding exercising. And they can cause us to have outbursts with people we love. They can cause us to kind of fold up in a ball and not want to go out. They're very polarizing events. And they bring into focus the values and dysfunctions that are within our families or within our friendships or relationships. But they also can bring out strengths in us as individuals, in our relationships at work, in the workplace, our business relationships, clients, and they can also strengthen our workplace values. We can expect a range of emotions that are normal during a tragedy. As the American Red Cross reminds us after any disaster, whatever you're feeling, there's no right or wrong. Whatever your employees are feeling, there's a range of emotions. There is no right or wrong. You are a normal person having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. Remember, this is not the new normal, as Governor Jerry Brown calls it. This is really the new abnormal. And it's important that we not numb out and that we take each moment and each emotional surge as something that's normal, natural, and important, that we feel safe about expressing that range of emotions without acting out. People also feel fear about returning to work or whether their job is going to be there. They may feel anxiety about their future, anger and grief all on the same day or even sometimes in the same hour. Next slide, please. COVID stress. We talk about stress, we talk about everyday stress. We have, or regular stress. We have 2 types of stress. We have distress, which is upsetting or unhealthy stress, which is normally what we think of when we think about stress. And then there's eustress, which is EU stress, meaning positive or healthy stress. Now, if you have too much EU stress, it can cause many of the same symptoms as distress. So, for example, you're getting married in the Bahamas. You just got a promotion, and you have to fly to Denver to give a speech to the leadership all in the same week. You're going to experience some of the stress reactions that you would experience during a time like this, a time of difficulty, which could be headaches, nausea, loss of appetite, sleep issues. It can be hard to focus. And we're starting to see emotional outbursts of tears or irritability. What we're seeing now in the current situation is really called acute stress. And acute stress is almost identical to post-traumatic stress because we start replaying images. We start replaying scenes from the news, or we start replaying a phone call or an email that we received that somebody that we knew has died because of the illness, or somebody's very sick and hospitalized because of COVID. And that gives us a surge of basically fear chemicals. We go into fight or flight. We may become deer frozen in the headlights. We may feel paralyzed. It may be difficult to work. These are all signs of acute stress and post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress will not start showing up until the summer, but it's really good to make sure to keep your finger on the pulse with your employees and to really talk about stress reactions, because addressing them now with peer support wellness groups can really help to mitigate the rise of PTSD several months from now. It's a very good preventive strategy. So it's really important to understand that you are a normal person having normal reactions to an abnormal situation, and to reaffirm that with each of your employees and team members and managers. It's really important that people understand that whatever they're feeling right now, this is an extraordinary situation, and the level of stress that everyone is under and the survival issues. You know, when we're talking about acute stress or post-traumatic stress, we're talking about a life and death situation. It's not a bad hair day. It means it's not an upsetting argument. It means that our survival and our family's survival has been impacted or somehow threatened because we've been directly threatened, or we've been exposed to images online or on TV that are disturbing, or someone we know has gone through it, or we've lost somebody. We are in a collective survival situation, and it's important to honor that, and to honor that every one of your employees is a hero. One of my teachers said that during a disaster, just getting out of bed and putting on your shoes and stepping out, putting one foot in front of the other every day is a badge of honor. These are very, very trying times, and each of us, each of you, is a hero. Self-care is the most important thing that we can learn how to do during this time, because it will help us in the wellness industry, it will help us become leaders in the wellness industry, and it will help each of us as individuals to help relieve some of the pressure of trying to be at the top of our games when we're really facing this huge epidemic that is severe and unprecedented. Next slide, please. Going back to PTSD, you know, June is PTSD Awareness Month, and even before COVID, the National Institute of Health declared PTSD a national epidemic. Last year, before this, there were 44 million Americans reported to be suffering from PTSD. Only 6 million of those were veterans. I'm sure that this is going to become more of a baseline for millions and millions of people. And as I said, if we honor and we work with the acute stress that everyone is experiencing now, we can help to prevent PTSD for ourselves, for our families. And the key is to create safe venues for people to talk about whatever it is they're experiencing without judgment. Next slides, please. Okay, so here are some of the signs of PTSD. Now remember, PTSD doesn't start to show up till about 6 months after the event. So if COVID alarms started sounding in February, but lockdown started in March, we're looking April, May, June, July, August, September in the fall is when we're going to start to see and hear and feel that post-traumatic stress is starting to surface. Now, what makes PTSD different is that you're removed from the original event by a period of time. It can be several months. It can even come up years from now. We hear about and we see combat veterans who come back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and 2 years later, 5 years later, suddenly they have a complete flashback to having lost somebody or having just missed an IED somewhere in Baghdad. And they go through this feeling of having flashbacks and sweats, night sweats, sleeping difficulties, phobias, hypervigilance, which is that feeling that your body is hot-wired and it feels like you want to jump out of your skin. It's a severe form of anxiety, and you live with a sense of dread and the fear that this is going to happen again. When the second wave hits, you will begin to monitor in yourself and the people who you're working with, clients, customers, and employees, flashbacks and a sense of fear that, uh-oh, what if this happens again? And again, asking somebody, what do you need? And making sure that you have a safe place for peer support discussions will help to mitigate and alleviate any surge of PTSD within your teams and to keep your business running. because PTSD can be very serious and can cause absences and can cause people to go out on disability. So we want to be ahead of this, and by addressing the fear and the stress now, we can actually get ahead of PTSD so that our people feel safe in the fall when the second wave and PTSD symptoms are likely to surface. Thinking ahead of the curve. All right, next slide, please. So here we have 3 ways to alleviate depression, burnout, and PTSD. Now, the first one I'm talking about is self-care. And self-care, the most important thing that we do with first responders is we give first responders a self-care tips, which say you've been through what we call a critical incident. This is a surprising event in which there was either severe injury or loss of life, and you may find that you feel it's disturbed your ability to function normally. It's very important that we be gentle with ourselves, that we balance rest and exercise, that we stay hydrated with plenty of water. That's very, very important. That we tend to avoid excess alcohol, sugar, and caffeine. We watch our diet. I think the most important thing with self-care right now is to avoid isolation, especially people who live alone and who are in lockdown. It's very important that people not eat alone, that you choose what you're going to eat, because that gives you back a sense of control. Make healthy choices as best you can. And if it's possible to set up little Zoom lunches or Zoom cafes, it may be 4 in the afternoon, where people have coffee and just kind of chill and talk about their day, that is going to alleviate the isolation, which can lead to PTSD. When we're traumatized, we tend to want to go into a shell and close the door and put the blanket over our head, and that's a normal reaction to something which is overwhelming. But when we want to build a culture of empathy, we want to make sure that people don't feel that they need to do that, and that they can come together. And I do have some activities that people can do to alleviate burnout that I've developed for New York City Health and Hospitals. It's just really important to keep talking and not isolate. Stay hydrated and choose healthy meals, and try to eat with others, even if it's a Zoom meal or a Zoom cafe. Emotional first aid tools, I'll talk about 1 or 2 on the next slide. These are tools that work very quickly to take the edge off these surges of stress. And if you go to my website, laurinadel.com, and you scroll down, there are 2 videos where I demonstrate 3 emotional first aid tools. One of them is called butterfly hugs, which you actually have to see on the video. One of them is color breathing, which I'll talk about in a moment. And one of them is an exercise where you let gravity pull all of your emotions down to your feet, and you only focus on what your feet are feeling. And that will basically clear the app up in your head and clear any disturbing feelings that you might be feeling in your body that are stress related. And it will help you to get to a state of calm and clear-mindedness very quickly. The third piece, which I've been talking about, and I cannot emphasize enough, is to find support and to ensure that your employees and your managers have support networks, company-run debriefing sessions. They can be remote or they can be in person, safe places on social networks or social media for people who have a shared experience, or basically just touching base with your employees 1 at a time. There's nothing like a phone call to help somebody feel cared for. So remember, when you're thinking about empathy, the question is, what do you need? And reach out. That means more than any formal program. It's private, and it can really encourage somebody to open up and help them to feel really cared for by your business and by your company. That's going to build loyalty, that's going to build contribution, and that's going to build long-term retention. And it will alleviate depression, burnout, and lower your rates of PTSD. All right, thank you. Next slide. Here are the 7 S's for self-care. Sleep, very important to get enough sleep. I do recommend for people who are having chronic insomnia that please ask your doctor, ask your primary care doctor for a prescription. If you don't like to take prescription medication, a lot of people don't. There are a lot of natural alternatives. There are amino acids, there's melatonin, there are herbal teas. Do a little bit of research and experiment and explore until you find the right combination for yourself. There's also wonderful aromatherapy sprays that you spray on your pillow that are very gentle and will help you to relax into sleep. Sunshine is a great healer, and we know that vitamin D gets depleted during times of stress. Sunshine is our best source of vitamin D, with a little bit of sunscreen, of course. Stress inoculations. Now, stress inoculations are what the military uses to help troops prepare for certain situations like living in bunkers, for example, or being away from home at the holidays, or other types of events that are predictable. We're living in a period where there's more unpredictability than predictability. That's what makes this such an uncomfortable experience. But as I spoke about before, if we know that there was probably going to be a second wave, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. If we know that there is probably going to be a second wave, and we know that the incidence of post-traumatic stress with people having flashbacks and shutting down and turning off and numbing out, that PTSD is more likely to surface around the time of the second wave. Well, we can help people to prepare for that with information and self-care tools. Get people practicing 5 minutes a day of some kind of self-care, and hopefully some kind of emotional first aid tools that can help take the edge off, where somebody can just take 5 minutes to feel better at a certain time every day, or you can even have a wellness pause for everybody on your team. Those are the best stress inoculations available. Know your stressors. In other words, know what upsets you. Sudden loud noises, which cause people to feel that they're going to jump out of their skin, that's one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress and also acute stress. So helping people to understand that if they feel like they're jumping out of their skin when there's a sudden noise, that this is a normal reaction, and to help them to practice some kind of breathing exercise, or to get up and stretch and take a walk after they've been triggered by a stressor. To incorporate self-care into the workday is also a great stress inoculation. We've talked about socialization and support, creating a safe environment for your employees and managers, and even upper management to get together either remotely or together and have coffee or have tea and just talk about what's going on, to help to normalize the fact that we don't have those opportunities for in-person interaction. Can create a culture of empathy within your brand. And finally, seek help. Sometimes it's very hard to get out of our own way, and it's important to understand that stress is physiological. At its core, stress is the release of molecules that are stress molecules, and that if you have a pre-existing trauma in your life, if you've lost your home to a fire, for example, or you've gone through something, something that is like a severe illness, or you or someone you know was hospitalized or had a very hard time with coronavirus, it can be really important to encourage that person or yourself to seek professional help, because this is complex. There are a lot of different layers. There are a lot of things that are hitting us simultaneously, and those cascades of stress hormones can become overwhelming. There's a lot of free help that's available online. There are a lot of mental health organizations that are offering free support groups on Zoom. And if you know anybody who would like to speak to me confidentially, offering to your listeners and your employees a complimentary conversation, they can contact me through my website. Next slide, please. Sleep. Again, sleep is essential for our immunity and it's for workplace productivity. I think it does help our sleep if we give ourselves a news break. It may prevent nightmares and what people are calling these strange COVID dreams. Don't take your screens into the bedroom. Leave your iPhones and devices outside, or if you need them, near your bed, because you may need to be called, in the middle of the night if you have kids who are family members or team members who rely on you for support. See if you can at least turn them on to vibrate while you're sleeping, so that it will be just enough to wake you, but not enough to really startle you. Homeopathic remedies and herbal remedies for sleep can be very helpful. And of course, medication, as I mentioned, with a prescription. Next slide, please. Sunshine, we spoke about this. COVID outcomes are worse for those with lower levels of vitamin D. Sunshine helps to boost mood. It also is the natural source of vitamin D. So try to eat lunch outside or go for a walk at least 15 minutes a day. They say that sunshine or sunlight cues special areas of the retina, which triggers the release of serotonin. Next slide, please. More sunshine. Nature also. I have a chapter in my book called All of Nature Speaks. For a period of 10 years, I spent part of every year studying with spiritual healers and shamans in South America, in the jungle, in the Andes, and in the suburbs of Rio de Janeiro. And all of these shamans and all of these healers had one message, and that message will be found in shamans and healers in Alaska, in Siberia, in Ireland, Native American indigenous healers, in Asia. This is a universal message of natural healers, spiritual healers. And the message is that all of nature speaks. And when we're highly stressed, if we start to listen to nature, we will begin to feel whole very, very quickly. Because nature, in its benign form, not during a natural disaster, and not during extreme forms, but in its natural, benign, organic form, nature is God's healer. Nature, if we sit outside, if we sit in a garden, if we listen to birds, if we watch our flowers come up, if we walk along the seashore, nature or Mother Nature will take our worry and our problems and our sorrow, and she will give us compassion and peace of mind and serenity. So take some time, give yourself a nature pause during the day, and you'll find that all of nature speaks to your heart. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're talking about stress inoculations. The Harvard research shows that we need 20 minutes a day of some kind of mind-body relaxation. It can be meditation, it could be yoga. People talk about Tai Chi. It can be some kind of mindful activity, mindful walking. For me, I find that swimming is the best meditation because I like the feeling of weightlessness. But the Harvard research also shows that 5 minutes a day, 4 times a day, will give us the same wellness benefits as one 20-minute period of meditation. This is really important because during this period of COVID, coronavirus, self-quarantine, isolation, threatening and disturbing stories on the news every day, freedom of movement, we're used to, as Americans, we have an unwritten right of freedom of movement. It's not in the Constitution, but that's the spirit of America, is the spirit of exploration and going out into the Wild West and putting your kayak in your SUV and going from the office to the river. Suddenly, a lot of the freedom of movement that we've taken for granted is temporarily suspended. And so that makes it really hard. All these stressors and stress amplifiers make it very hard, difficult to close your eyes and concentrate for 20 minutes at a time, especially if you have family at home, especially if you're a caregiver or you're helping your kids with their schoolwork, or you just have a lot of deadlines and stress, for your business, doing taxes. I mean, all of these things are additional stressors. So I would like to suggest and introduce the idea that I'd like to invite you to take 5 minutes a day when you'll close your eyes. And even if you just think about going to some place, it could be in your home, it could be on vacation, any place that gives you a warm, good feeling of calm and well-being. And just do that for 5 minutes a day. Hit the pause button, let's say 11:30 in the morning or 12 o'clock or just before you go to lunch. Give yourself 5 minutes a day and do that every day for 30 days. So it becomes a new habit, like brushing your teeth. Once it becomes a new habit, you'll find that the new behavior is installed. And if you don't do it, you'll find that you miss it. So now let's move on to 2 times a day. Find 2 windows during the day when you can take a 5-minute break. 4 o'clock is usually a good time because we all get low blood sugar, and we usually take a cup of coffee or tea so we can kind of push through it. Try closing your eyes and just going back to a place where you remember feeling calm and have a sense of well-being, and make that your second window. And then ultimately you want to have 4 pause periods, 4 periods of 5 minutes a day when you're just going to close your eyes and relax or re-experience what it was like to relax. And these are really excellent modalities for stress inoculations. Next slide, please. I think that stress inoculation are really kind of an express route to meditation. So if you can't meditate, do formal meditation, or you can't concentrate if you're meditating, take 5 minutes to close your eyes and think back to a time and place where you felt completely relaxed and safe. And let yourself drift back into this experience and float into that experience as if it was happening around you now, so that you're looking through your own eyes at as if you were in your canoe, or you're paddling, you're doing stand-up paddling, or you're on your boat, or you're up in the mountains, or you're just sitting, in a beach chair relaxing, and just re-experience that. You will be giving yourself a boost of those molecules of well-being and relaxation. The brain knows how to do this instantly and organically, and that will be your number one express route to meditation. The other tool, which is also an emotional first aid tool, if you're feeling very stressed, is just simply to light a candle. You can do this with music or without music, and watch the flame flicker. If you can do it for 5 minutes, great, but start off with 1 minute and notice how the flame changes, and notice the aura of the flame, and notice there'll be little kind of like pieces of colored light that break off from the flame. It's very, very soothing, and you can feel that relaxation going all the way down to your feet as you watch the flame. And these are 2 express routes to meditative state activities. Next slide, please. Here's another one of my favorites, called color breathing. And I demonstrate that in the CBS News interview, which you can find on my homepage. My website is laurinadel.com. But you can do it right now if you check in with your body and notice where you're experiencing any stress. Just close your eyes and ask that area of your body that's feeling stressed, or ask your stress, what color would help you to feel better or calm? And whatever color comes into your mind, because it may be different each time, you say blue is what you're feeling that your stress would want. Just breathe it in, and you don't have to visualize it. You can even just say the word blue or green, and just let that wave of color go into that area of your body where you're feeling stressed and relaxing and nurturing and soothing. And then as you exhale, you can release and get rid of the stress by breathing out a different color. And as you do a few rounds of color breathing, you'll find that it takes the edge off stress, and it helps you to feel calm. And it can even diffuse a panic attack if you have a kid who's starting to really get triggered. So try color breathing, because it always works. It works 100% of the time, and it works within seconds. Next slide, please. This one is called Focus on the Feet. I also have a demo on the homepage of laurinadel.com. The second video shows me demonstrating this technique during an interview with Dan Rather. And what you do is you imagine that your mind is a cursor, and everything that's in your head and your mind and your body that's upsetting, you're just going to swipe it down to the soles of your feet, or allow gravity to just pull all of your thoughts and feelings down to the soles of your feet, and rub your feet on the floor so that the only thing that you can hear is the sound of your feet rubbing on the floor, and that the only thing you can feel is the sensation of your feet making contact with the floor. And if you can look at the world through the soles of your feet, even better. And that will clear the anxiety out. That will clear your head quickly and within seconds. So it's instantly calming, because your feet cannot do anxiety or stress. Your feet can only do feet things. And it will really clear your mind so that you can go back to work very quickly and easily. It's also a great peer support exercise. It's an activity that everybody can do in a Zoom meeting or a Zoom peer support session. Next slide, please. We can't control COVID. We really can't control anything. Life is very uncertain. If I ask you what the weather is going to be in 2 days, we don't know. We're living in a very amorphous, ambiguous time. And so this is not the time to should ourselves. This is, oh, I really should lose 20 pounds, or I really should stop smoking, or I really should give up sugar, or I really should go on a self-improvement program. Now is not the time to do that, because now is the time to get through it in moderation, hopefully. Now is the time to help ourselves to feel comfortable and safe. So if you have something that you feel you should do, let's say there's a phone call that's going to require that you have to sit on hold for 10 minutes, and then you're going to get a robot. And as a health provider, I can tell you that I go through this as a provider. If I call a health insurance company, to give you an example. So I sit on hold, then I give the voicemail robot my provider ID, then I sit on hold again, and then eventually I get a customer service rep in the other part of the world. And the first thing they ask me for is the provider ID that I just gave to the robot 3 times. That is a stressor. So if I know that that phone call is going to take me 20 minutes, and I don't need to do it right now because I have other things that are more important, I will ask myself, if I make this phone call, is it going to give me energy? Is it going to conserve my energy? Or is it going to drain my energy? And if the answer is C, drain my energy, and I don't absolutely need to do it today to meet a deadline, then I put it on my not to do list. And then I have 20 minutes that I have given myself that I can use for some kind of comforting, relaxing, fun, or stress relieving activity. So I call this the power question. If I do X, or if I go to this meeting, or if I do this phone call, or if I spend another 20 minutes online, or if I do Facebook now for half an hour, is it going to give me energy? Is it going to help me conserve my energy? Or is it going to drain my energy? Be ruthlessly honest with yourself. If the answer is C, don't do it. And give yourself that amount of time to do something wonderful for yourself. That's the best antidote to COVID stress. Next slide, please. Again, very important not to isolate. Companies can set up peer support debriefing sessions. Join a support group of some kind, or just get together with some friends. You can do it by phone, you can do it online, you can do it by Zoom. I'm sure you can do it on social media as well. Try to make sure that you don't spend a lot of time in isolation, and that you reach out to other people and ask them, what do you need? Whether it's a coworker, a team member, an employee, or even a colleague. There's no such thing as too much support during a time of acute stress and during a disaster. Next slide, please. As we said, don't be afraid to seek professional help. It's really important as managers and employers that we help to destigmatize the importance of acknowledging that this is a very painful and difficult period, and that resources are available, and those resources are completely confidential. Employees have to know that they're not going to be punished, or that they're not going to be promoted or rewarded because they went to seek professional help within the EAP or other structure. This is, I think, one of the wonderful opportunities that we have as wellness professionals, because wellness is kind of like the healthiest venue to offer mental health services to people, where they're not going to feel that they're being diagnosed, or that they're being medicated, or that they're being put on a list. If we offer wellness services, whether in the form of support, or whether the form of online meditation or Tai Chi, any kind of wellness activity that we can offer people during this time is going to help improve the mental health picture overall, and individual employees will feel that their needs are being met, and that will help to build a culture of empathy where they feel valued, and they were going to want to continue contributing long-term to help the overall situation that we're facing as a society and globally. Many of us have global businesses, so this concept of building a culture of empathy and an empathy brand can be a global amplifier for our businesses. Next slide, please. Again, we're talking about corporations and businesses. The 3 C's: communicate, communicate, collaborate, community, and community. Communicate and community are very, very important. We want to tell employees that mental health matters, that their mental health matters, and to be transparent in communication so that fears and anxiety are reduced and people feel free to look for help. Some larger companies are offering mental health counselors to sit on weekly phone calls to answer employees' questions. If that's not possible, you can host a mental health webinar, or even better, call it a wellness webinar for acute stress. You can have lunch and learns via Zoom, newsletters, signage. Make your employees know that you want to collaborate with them about their emotional health. And regenerate. Encourage management and employees to follow 5 minutes a day. I call them soul vitamins for self-care, to come up with different ideas themselves. 5 minutes to listen to nature. All of nature speaks. Offer wellness moments at work. Remote offerings can include webinars and newsletters, and also peer support. I cannot emphasize strongly enough that 30 years of working with first responders around the world has helped to create a model for communication, cooperation, and safety for first responders coming back from very disturbing calls in which they were helpless to save somebody's life. This helps to alleviate and to even mitigate and prevent longer-term problems like substance abuse and PTSD. Set up settings and venues where people can talk peer-to-peer, and make it a confidential, safe place. And you will be building a brand that really protects the mental health and wellness of your employees for the long haul. And COVID is going to be a long haul. Next slide, please. Here are some power questions. I think that these are good for self-reflection and journaling. I think you can look at them, you can certainly look at them at your own leisure. They're basically questions that help us to assess how we have grown as a result of going through this event. You know, who was I 2 months ago and who am I now? What else can I be learning from this event? Who do I want to become? And how has this event changed me positively and negatively? What choices can I make to feel better? That's very empowering. If you set up a Zoom call and you ask people, what are they doing to feel better? I think that can be a really encouraging and empowering peer support meeting. How can I help someone else? And how can I find meaning and purpose in this situation? And that's really when we're talking about building a culture of empathy, it's really important that people believe that their work is meaningful, that it has a purpose, and that it's contributing to the general healing that we need during and after the emergency state of this pandemic is over, because we're going to be healing for at least 3 to 5 years, and we need to feel safe to talk about emotions and issues that will come up from time to time as we progress, and we are progressing. Next slide, please. Again, you know, we're looking at how we can grow employee retention, employee loyalty, building a brand that's based around empathy and concern for each other, concern for our clients' well-being during a time of extreme stress. As living beings, we're growing all the time. But when we look back and say, I wouldn't be who I am without that event, we get to receive the gift of growth. Next slide, please. I believe that catastrophe can serve a higher purpose. Disasters make us aware that the life force within us needs tending daily. This is why we are here. If nothing else, when you speak to people who've had an emergency situation, whether it's had a car accident, whether they've helping somebody who's just come out of the hospital, one of the most important lessons that we can learn, even during a grieving period, is how to take care of ourselves. How can we nurture our wounds? How can we help ourselves to feel less afraid? This is the higher purpose that this catastrophe, COVID catastrophe, is offering us, is an opportunity to take care of the life force within us and within each other. Next slide, please. Next slide. Here we are. So healing is not a straight line. I cannot emphasize this over enough. I cannot emphasize this over and over enough. A year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, you may see something online or on TV. You may get a message from somebody who reminds you of what you went through during lockdown. It could be something very subtle. It could be suddenly you cleaning out your drawers and you find some masks and gloves from the quarantine period and you start to cry. This is completely normal. We're all going through something called traumatic grief. And traumatic grief is what we go through when we're experiencing loss. When you go through a disaster, you go through a loss of control because we couldn't prevent it, a loss of safety because we feel more vulnerable, and sometimes even a loss of identity, which is who am I if I'm not this strong, focused, on top of everything person. Healing takes time, and it zigs and it zags, and that's completely normal. We have within us this remarkable healing intelligence. When you cut your finger, if I asked you how many skin cells do you need to heal your paper cut, you could not tell me. And yet you know what to do because that paper cut will heal. We have this healing intelligence within us, and it will help us to recover from this disaster as individuals and also as communities and as teams and as businesses and as corporations and as nations and as a species. But we do need to be patient, the second gift, because healing is not a straight line and we will zig and zag. Next slide, please. Empathy skills can be learned. It's really interesting. When I was teaching for the American Management Association for 10 years, and a piece of my critical thinking program was teaching empathy skills. It's really important to be able to reason something through from somebody else's position if you need buy-in for your project or you need additional funding for your project. So it's really important to learn some empathy skills. You don't necessarily have to feel what another person is feeling, but you do have to acknowledge and respect that somebody else's needs may be different from yours. So I'd like to ask you to commit to one act of empathy a day, which can be as simple as asking somebody, what do you need? Or, I know that this is a tough time. Is there something I can do to help? Encourage your employees to be empathic. I would recommend that you put up a big a whiteboard and call it an empathy wall, and leave Post-its nearby and have people write down their thoughts, or encourage them to put down memes or quotes, or anything that encourages the sense of connection during times like this, during times of trauma. Try an empathy wall with Post-its. It also gets people away for, I guess you can do it online as well, but having a physical wall, I think, is something that is playful and creative, and it's a whole brain activity, because the right brain looks at the pictures and the shapes, and the left brain will imprint the languaging on the empathy wall. Please feel free to contact me about starting peer support groups based on the First Responders Protocol. I'm a member of the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, which has pioneered peer support for first responders for the last 30 years. Start a happiness jar. This is a great thing to do for your family. Have everybody, again, leave some Post-its or leave some papers near the jar, and have people write down something that made them happy every day. It's recommended that you do it for a year. I would say do it for a week and see how it works. Open the jar and read about all the amazing things that have happened. I guess you can do a virtual happiness jar, but if you have kids at home, a real one is a really great uplifting tool. I recommend that if you read chapter 3 and 4 of the 5 gifts, it talks about psychological prepping and first responder peer support models, that you can take the essentials and use it to build your own brand of peer support groups and peer support networks in-house. Next slide, please. And finally, this is one of my favorite quotes. It's a Hindu proverb. It says, "Even the withered branch grows again, and the sunken moon returns. Wise ones who ponder this are not troubled in adversity." We are growing. The spirit of healing, the intelligence to heal, and the spirit of renewal are part of our blueprint as human beings. And we will always find ways to heal and recover, and to navigate our way through the darkness together into a new dawn and a new phase of recovery and business growth. Next slide. This is a quote from a documentary that you can also see on my website, which I wrote, and I'm very proud Dan Rather narrated this for me. The quote is, "It is our American tradition to come together in times of tragedy, and this is how we grow as a people and as a nation." Empathy, again, is one of the unwritten rights in our Constitution, and we need it now more than ever. We need to build it into our business models and platforms. If there's something that I can do to help, if you have any questions, please reach out. My website is laurinadel.com, and the emotional first aid tools are videos on the homepage of the website. So thank you again for your time, and I hope that 1 or 2 ideas have sparked something in you to help you build your business with a culture of empathy, and to encourage your employees to feel safe and acknowledged about speaking honestly about what they're going through and what we're all going through together. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day and a peaceful evening. This is Dr. Laurie.